Keir Starmer says he wants to reduce the number of people going to prison through what he calls renewed efforts to cut re-offending. And in order to make that happen, one of his most eye-catching appointments is that of James Thompson of the Thompson shoe repair and key cutting business, a man who has experience of employing people from prison. I think about 10 or 20% of the workforce are ex-prisoners. It seems like a revolutionary concept to have a minister in charge of a department they actually know something about. Let's talk about this with Mark Fairhurst. Mark is National Chair of the Prison Officers Association. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
So what did you make of the appointment of James Thompson?
Well, like everybody else, it came as a major surprise. I actually met James about 12 months ago when he was doing a review into prison officer training. So I look forward to working with him, and hopefully together between us we can come up with some good ideas to actually reform the system and make it work the way it should do.
He says that we are addicted to punishment, by which he meant that we put far too many people in prison. What do you make of that?
Well, what I make of that is when I joined the job in 1992, we had a prison population of just over 41,000. It now stands at 88,000, and we haven't kept up with demand. And the last government were in, hell-bent on sentencing people to prison for longer terms, and being more draconian with those sentences, but they haven't created enough space to cater for what the courts are now sending us. So the immediate crisis that we face is the population crisis. So rather rapidly, I would think this government are going to have to make some brave decisions on how they're going to have to actually create some additional space, because certainly by the end of July, we will be full.
But do you think that a lot of the people that are in prison should be there?
We have a lot of people in prison for petty crimes. So the last government already made a presumption against sentences of 12 months or less, which we welcome, because there's not a lot we can do with people who are serving shorter sentences. So we think with robust community sentences, they would be better served, and justice would be better served in that manner. But we have a lot of prison spaces taken up by people with really severe mental health disorders, because we're the only place that they can go. There's not enough investment in our communities for mental health services and secure mental health institutions. So the only other place to put them is in a prison. So that really does need to be addressed. But this is a long-term ambition. It's not going to be done overnight.
So if people with serious mental health problems are in prison, how does being in prison affect them, and how does them being in prison affect the other prisoners?
Well, when you've got a severe mental health disorder and you're on all kinds of medication, we haven't got the support services in the form of mental health nurses in prisons to support them and meet their needs. Prison officers don't actually get trained in how to deal with people who've got severe mental health disorders. So they would be better served in secure mental health institutions, which we haven't got enough of. So when they have psychotic episodes or a mental health breakdown, it disturbs other prisoners, and that creates frustration, anger, and in some cases violence. And of course, we're not able to meet their needs because they do have mental health conditions that we're not trained to deal with. So it really does need to be addressed.
The right-wing press are forever going on about how prisons are like holiday camps. Is that right?
No, nothing could be further from the truth. You ask any prison officer and you ask any serving prisoner if they think they're in a holiday camp. If you think living in a squalid cell, which was designed to hold one person, and you're sharing with somebody else, you're sharing a toilet, there's no privacy, there's often cockroaches and rats running around everywhere, you're banged up for prolonged periods because we simply haven't got the staff to provide an adequate regime, that's not a holiday camp to me. It's certainly not the sort of holiday I'd want to go on.
And what's a typical day like for a prisoner?
It depends what type of establishment you're in, and it depends on the staffing levels. So we hope to have a predictable and stable regime so we can address offender behaviour, and we can create work skills for prisoners so they have hope when they're released, so they have a skill to go out with, and hopefully they can get a job. But for the majority of prisons these days, because we simply haven't got the staffing on the landings to facilitate that, you're very lucky to get the basics. So you may be lucky in some prisons to be unlocked for half an hour's exercise a day, maybe get a shower, phone your relatives at home, and not much else, because if you think of a prison that holds 1,000 prisoners and you've only got 500 activity spaces, which is a combination of workshops and education spaces, you can only cater for half that population, which means the other half are either out for an hour in the morning or afternoon, or if we have got no staff available, unfortunately, they're going to be banged up. That's not productive for anyone. My vision in the future, and I'm sure James Thompson would agree, would we have workspaces and vocational spaces for every single prisoner in our care, so they're busy during the working week and we can reintegrate them back into society when they're released. At least we get them into that work ethic while they're inside prison, as well as addressing their addictions and their offending behaviour as well. So let's hope that comes to fruition.
Am I right in thinking that if you go into prison clean and sober, it is quite likely that you'll come out a drug addict?
Well, I'm not going to deny that. The evidence is there for all to see. Unfortunately, you know, prisons are rife with drugs. That shouldn't happen. We have security at the gate. But one of the biggest problems we have at the moment, believe it or not, is drugs entering prisons via drone deliveries. Drones are becoming an increasing problem because we've got such good security at the gate now because of an investment in security equipment. They're now, the criminal gangs, they're now thinking of other ways to get things into prison. And the major problem at the moment is actually drone deliveries, because technology is improving week by week. And all that happens is drone delivery, program the GPS coordinates into the drone, it hovers outside the cell window, and the prisoner collects the drugs from the drone, or they drop it into an exercise yard when prisoners are exercising. Ridiculous to know, but that's how easy it is.
And people might be aghast at that, but if the regime that you've described, that you're only let out of your cell for half an hour a day and you're occupying a small room that was made for one person as a punishment, and actually two people are in there, then you'd have to be quite a strong personality not to be tempted to take drugs.
Yeah, of course, that's the problem, and that's in the most severe cases. Most of the time, prisons will go to activities in the morning and the afternoon, so they're unlocked for 3 or 4 hours of the morning or the afternoon. But when we've got prisons that can't recruit staff or retain staff, we have severe issues with activities for prisoners. But yeah, I agree with what you've just said. Boredom is a big thing and people do get tempted. So let's remove the boredom. Let's make sure there's an activity space for everyone. Let's make sure they're doing something constructive and purposeful with the time, which addresses their offending behaviour and gives them a chance in society when they're released. And then maybe that will go away, that issue.
As well as drugs, though, is it possible that the way in which prisoners are treated, which, in some cases seems pretty inhumane, are we releasing people who are worse for society than when they went in?
Well, this is a good debate, isn't it? You know, our prisons are crumbling because of a lack of investment in the infrastructure. You know, the last government outsourced the maintenance of prisons, which has been an absolute disaster. So we need to modernise our prisons so people are living in decent living conditions and staff are working in decent working conditions. Because I want prisoners leaving our care thinking that, well, actually, we've been treated okay. They've tried the best with us. Maybe I've left with a work skill and got an interview for a job. I'd rather have that scenario than people going inside, coming out bitter and twisted and fighting against the system because of the way they've been treated in a prison, or because the resources haven't been there to address their offending behaviour, or because they've been, placed in a squalid cell which has got damp on the walls and cockroaches running everywhere. We want to move away from that. But this has been decades of underinvestment. Not just from the Tory government, from previous governments before them. Prisons are not vote winners. They're not a sexy thing to talk about. The general public in the whole don't really care about what happens in a prison, but what we've got to remember is 99.9% of the people we lock up will one day be released and be your neighbours and be living with you in your communities. So let's give them a chance.
Should they actually be going there in the first place? I mean, we have the largest prison population in Europe. Are we a uniquely criminal lot?
Well, that's a matter for government, isn't it? And what they need to do is they need to review sentencing policy. So do we need to lock so many people up, or can we do something better in our communities with community sentencing? But that takes a massive investment in an understaffed and an underfunded probation service. So that's an option. We also need to look at what the Justice Select Committee said last year, where they recommended a resentencing exercise for IPP prisoners. That would free up about 3,000 spaces if we release some of them. So
what's IPP? Sorry.
So that's a sentence you serve for indeterminate sentence for public protection. And in some instances, there are people who are 10, 15 years over their release date because simply we've kept them inside because they're classed as a risk to the public, but they can't all be a risk to the public. And if you look at the Just Select Committee recommendations from last year, they said, well, we really need to review it and we need to do a resentencing exercise.
Norway is often talked about when the subject of prisons come up. It has a low prison population and a very low reoffending rate. After a 2-year sentence is served in this country, 59% of those released then go on to reoffend. 59%. In Norway, it's 20%. Yeah. So what do they do that we don't?
Look, I think it's very unfair comparing us to Scandinavian countries. We're not Norway. Our culture is not the same as Norway. It takes 3 years to train a prison officer in Norway. It takes 6 weeks in the UK to train a prison officer. So if we're going to compare things, let's professionalise prison officer training. Let's pay us what we're worth. Let's reduce our retirement age from ridiculous retirement age of 68 to 60. And let's make our prisons modern and give people a chance. So if you want to compare us to Norway or any other Scandinavian prison, then let's look at what they've done. They've probably invested heavily in everything, and that's why they're so successful. But we're not Norway, and our culture is not Norway, and the way our youths act on the streets is not Norway. And by the way, Norwegian police carry guns. We don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're an outlier in that regard, aren't we? It seems a bit odd. I mean, a lot of our police do carry guns, but but by and large, they don't. I guess that's a different argument, isn't it? But Norwegians are human beings just like we are, and they commit crimes just like we do, and yet what they do with those prisoners in jail in Norway seems to have a radically different effect on those people. So is it because a Norwegian jail actually would look like a holiday camp to the reporter of a right-wing newspaper?
Well, if you look at the most recently built Norwegian jail, it's similar to what an apartment block would look like. So when a prisoner goes into a Norwegian jail, they're actually faced with a cell which looks nothing like a cell. It's more like a flat, which have, an ensuite shower and toilet, which have cooking facilities, which have a company living area and a bedroom area. So it's nothing like a prison cell. There are no bars. They go to work every day. They're working like 30, 40 hours a week as a prisoner, or learning new skills. They get time to visit their family at home. They get day release as well. So it's a mix of like an open estate prison and a rehabilitative prison. They probably have high security prisons in Norway where that doesn't happen, but they do things differently because they've got a vastly reduced prison population. They've got higher staff to prisoner ratios. They pay their prison staff well and they train them well. So things are a lot different in Norway because it's so modern, and they've invested heavily in not only prisons but crime reduction as well. So if we're going to look at those models, we're going to have to find the funding from somewhere to do it. And I can tell you now, as we stand here today, the prison service this financial year so far are £100 million overspent. So trying to convince the Treasury to fund absolutely anything when it comes to prisons is going to be extremely difficult.
Well, they are making some of the right noises. I mean, it's very, very early days, of course, for this new government. And one of the things that they've suggested is building mini prisons across the country to, in their words, fix the broken justice system. What are your thoughts on that?
We've always been against tightened prisons. We warned the last government not to build prisons that housed 1,800, 2,000 prisoners. They're too big. They do not work. Smaller self-contained units with higher staffing ratios would work a lot better. We'd be able to do our job. We'd be able to address offender behaviour and give people a chance. So we'd be all for smaller self-contained prisons with higher staffing ratios.
You've mentioned staff a lot. What's staff morale like?
It's never been so bad. It's on the floor. And our priorities as a union, well, for one, they've got the pay recommendations from our pay review board that need to be signed off. We need a pay award now. We've been waiting too long for that. So that's a priority. They need to address our retirement age, which is 68. We want it reduced to 60. That's a priority. And of course, we want our right to strike restored by a Labour government, because that was removed from us in 1994. So they're our priorities for now.
Very good to talk to you, Mark. Thanks so much for your time. Mark Fairhurst, National Chair of the Prison Officers Association.